They called me dependable, thoughtful, the kind of woman who never made waves, never asked for much. So when the Hawthorne family flew off to Lisbon for the annual literary summit, they left me behind to care for Walter, my bedridden father-in-law. Melody hugged me with her perfectly manicured hands, whispering something about holding down the fort. Julian. My husband smiled like I'd just volunteered. Brett barely looked up from his phone. "It's only a week," Julian said, brushing a kiss on my forehead. "You're the only one we trust with him." That sentence, "You're the only one we trust," used to make me feel honored. Now it landed like a quiet insult. The car tires crunched down the gravel path as the SUV disappeared beyond the wrought iron gates. I stood alone on the porch of the Hawthorne estate, clutching the laminated care schedule Melody had left behind, like a manual for assembling furniture. Every step detailed, every moment accounted for. Inside the house was too quiet. Dust hung in the beams of morning light, and the air smelled faintly of old paper and disinfectant. I moved down the hall, tray in hand, to the east wing, where Walter's room had always been kept dark, sterile, and reverent like a tomb. I pushed open the heavy door, expecting the same image I had seen for the past 3 months. A still man in a hospital bed hooked up to beeping machines, unmoving, silent, but the room was empty. Not silent, not still. Walter Hawthorne, age 78, stroke victim, legally incapacitated. According to every document Melody ever sent, was standing. He turned to me slowly, his voice dry but precise. "About time they left," he said. My feet froze. My breath caught. He walked to the door, closed it softly behind me, and turned the lock with an ease that stole every bit of air from my lungs. Then he smiled. "Now," he said, stepping closer, "we begin." I didn't speak for a long moment. My eyes stayed locked on Walter, as if blinking might break whatever strange spell I'd fallen under. "You're not sick?" I finally whispered. He gave a dry laugh. "Sick of watching them twist everything I built, yes. Sick, in body, no." He moved toward the window, pulling open the heavy curtains. Light flooded in, illuminating a wall lined with portraits, generations of Hawthorns looking proud and powerful. My picture wasn't among them. He turned to face me. "Sit down, Elaine. We have catching up to do." I sat because I didn't know what else to do. For 6 years I had tried to belong in this house. I married Julian thinking I was entering a family that valued tradition, legacy, and depth. I'd been wrong. They valued image, reputation, optics, and they used people like me to protect it all. It didn't start that way. When Julian and I met at a book event in Chicago, I was working as a junior editor at a mid-sized publishing house. He was charming, smart, full of ambition and old-world confidence. I was drawn in by his energy. He said I had a classic soul, told me I saw people, that I was the kind of woman who grounded a man. I believed him. Within a year, we were married, and I had left my job, moved into the estate, and was slowly folded into the fabric of the family. That's how Melody put it during my first Thanksgiving here. But folded in turned out to mean faded out. I became the behind-the-scenes helper, organizing brunches, taking notes during family business calls, baking for fundraisers I wasn't credited for. My ideas were passed off as Melody's. My suggestions got repeated by Brett with slight tweaks and applause. Julian always said I was too humble to care about credit. When Walter had his stroke, or what we all believed was a stroke, Julian told me I was the only one he trusted to oversee the home nurses. I moved out of our apartment and into the guest room down the hall. The guest room became my room. My world shrank slowly. And then all at once, mail started arriving with Melody's name on our accounts. Documents I never remembered signing. I asked Julian once and he waved it off. "Consolidation," he said. "Easier for tax purposes. You're still part of it all." But I wasn't. The invitations stopped coming. The family group chats became two-person threads. Melody once posted a family photo captioned "Legacy Bloodline," and I wasn't in it. She'd cropped me out, literally. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was just more sensitive because I'd given up so much, my job, my home, my independence. Then there was the night I collapsed, We'd just finished a healing dinner that Melody hosted for her podcast donors. I had helped plate every dish, lit every candle. When it ended, I took one sip of wine and woke up hours later on the kitchen floor. Julian said I must have had a blood sugar crash. But I remembered the wine tasting off. I brushed it aside, because that's what I did. I gave people the benefit of the doubt. I believed family came first, even when family didn't believe in me. But now Walter was staring at me with an expression I hadn't seen before. Not pity, not confusion. Something close to remorse. "You gave them too much," he said quietly. I swallowed. "You watched it happen." "I did," he admitted, "because I needed to see what they would do when no one was looking. And I needed someone in the inside who could feel what I saw but wasn't blinded by blood." I blinked. "You used me." He didn't deny it. "Yes, but not like they did." I stood up then, anger replacing the numbness. "So you let me get erased, let me serve like a maid while they stripped everything I had left." "You're still here," he said simply, "which means they didn't win yet." I wanted to scream, to run, but I stayed. Because something deep inside me, something that had grown quieter over the years, had just stirred awake. Maybe for the first time since I said I do, Walter walked to the bookshelf and pulled out a leather folder. "Elaine," he said, his voice low, steady, almost fatherly, "it's time you saw what they've really built. And what they're about to lose." I didn't know it yet, but that folder was going to change everything. The folder Walter handed me was thick-bound in brown leather with initials stamped into the corner. H.E.L., Hawthorne Estate Ledger. Inside, everything was organized in neat categories: properties, trusts, publishing rights, royalties, investments, even health documents. And there, in Section 3, Elaine Cho, former rights holder. Former. There was a scanned copy of the copyright deed for Whispers of the Orchard, the book my mother wrote 20 years ago. The one she self-published when no one would take her poetry. I had promised to preserve it. I even opened a small imprint just to keep it alive. Now it was listed under Hawthorne Literary Trust, with my name scratched out digitally, replaced by Melody Hawthorne. I touched the paper. My fingers trembled. Next to it was an email exchange. Subject: Repackaging Whispers. Melody had pitched it as a rediscovered collection by a forgotten female voice reimagined through the lens of feminine resilience. She was presenting it as her find, her project. She'd even quoted one of my mother's verses in her TEDx talk. Without credit. I looked at Walter. They stole her voice. "They stole a lot more," he said grimly. He reached for the laptop beside him, powered it on, and opened a folder titled Event Footage. Inside were dozens of video files, hidden camera recordings, audio files, even screenshots of group messages I'd never seen. He clicked on one labeled Melody Brunch Metamachi. The screen lit up with a familiar room, Melody's recording studio disguised as a minimalist kitchen set. She was seated at the table with Julian and Brett. A whiteboard behind them read, "Legacy Strategy Phase 2. Melody spoke first. "If we're going to push the brand, we need a sob story. I want the silent sister-in-law narrative." Elaine's already halfway invisible. "Let's lean in." Julian leaned back in his chair, smirking. "She's perfect, really. Quiet, loyal, no family left to object. We'll ease her out of the records and make her the inspiration behind Melody's breakthrough." Brett added, "I already drafted the necessary paperwork. With the signature overlays, she won't even know she signed. We just need to keep her mellow." Melody giggled. "Her calming drops are doing their job. I told her they were herbal." She thanked me. They laughed. I stared at the screen, unable to blink. They had been planning this, not just legally but psychologically, managing me like a liability, a soft-voiced, well-mannered liability. The next file was labeled Dinner Party Sedation. Walter clicked play. The audio was scratchy but clear enough. Julian's voice. I added a little more this time. She was starting to ask questions about the refinancing. Then Melody in a lower tone. "I'll distract her. I'll say it's just stress. Women our age are always told that, right?" They all laughed again. I turned away from the screen. "Enough," I whispered. Walter didn't stop me. He let the silence stretch. My heart was thudding, my hands cold. This wasn't just manipulation. It was erasure, from my mother's poetry to my own memories. They weren't just stealing what I owned, they were rewriting who I was. I thought back to the wine, the dreams I had that didn't feel like dreams, the emails I never got, the meetings I was too tired to attend, the way Julian always had a soft voice and a glass of orange juice waiting when I woke up from one of those nights. I had been drugged, legally signed out of my own life, and I had thanked them for it. I thought he loved me, I said quietly. Walter was quiet a moment. Then he said, Julian loves power, and you made the mistake of trusting someone who thinks love is control. He walked to the cabinet and retrieved another file. Here, he said, this is what made me start watching them closely. Inside was a single-page spreadsheet titled Transfer Timeline. It was a list of dates, properties, and funds. On the far right column, status, complete. One entry stood out. Elaine's apartment sale, $3,000, transferred to Hawthorne Holdings via JH. I blinked. That was... When Julian said his investment project fell through, I gave him the money to help restart. I signed the sale papers myself. Walter nodded slowly. Except you signed a blank template. He filled in the rest later. I couldn't breathe. My mind raced back to that night, Julian pacing in the hallway, apologizing, looking devastated. I failed. I just need one chance to rebuild. I'll make it right. For us. I had believed him. The truth hit like a slow-moving avalanche, not sharp, just heavy, crushing. I stood up. I need to get out of this room, I said. Walter didn't stop me. I walked out of the bedroom, down the long hallway, past the guest portraits, past the charity plaques, past the copy of Whispers of the Orchard framed on the gallery wall, with Melody's name underneath. I stepped outside into the cold morning air, sat down on the front steps, and stared at nothing for several minutes. Then slowly I took out my phone. There was one person I had never told anything to. Not because I didn't trust her, but because I didn't want to admit I'd become small. Vi. We used to work together. She was my assistant editor back in Chicago. Left publishing to join a tech startup. Wicked smart, eyes like razors. I hadn't spoken to her in 3 years. I texted, Elaine, you still do forensic data stuff. I need help. She replied within 2 minutes. Vi, tell me where you are. I'm in. And just like that, a spark lit inside me. I wasn't just a ghost in this story anymore. I was about to become the narrator. Vi arrived that same evening. She showed up in a zip-up hoodie, high-top sneakers, and a canvas bag filled with gear. She didn't waste time on greetings. I need access to all your devices, she said, dropping onto the living room floor like it was her command center. Phone, laptop, anything connected to your accounts. I handed her my phone and she pulled out a data reader. Within minutes, she had a full data dump copying onto her hard drive. I'll start with metadata on your signed documents, she said. See if the timestamps line up. I nodded, then hesitated. They used drops, like calming supplements, but I think they were drugging me. Vi looked up, her expression tightening. That tracks. If they wanted to alter your awareness, timing would matter. We'll find it. An hour later, she found something. Elaine, she said, spinning the laptop toward me, they created a joint investment account in your name, without your knowledge. The IP logs show the login location, Brett's office, the day you thought you were sick. She clicked again. Another document appeared, a digitally signed guardianship transfer naming Melody as interim decision-maker over my affairs. The document was dated 4 weeks ago, the same week I'd fainted during a photo shoot for Melody's healing retreat campaign. I'd been helping with the staging like always. She told me I needed rest, gave me a special smoothie. I'd woken up groggy, disoriented. Is this legal? I asked. Vi shrugged. With a corrupt notary and a digital signature, it's hard to challenge, but it gets worse. She opened one last file. It was a recorded Zoom call. Melody, Julian, Brett, and a man I didn't recognize, a psychiatrist. Julian said, "We've seen behavioral instability. She's forgetful, withdrawn. Classic signs of dissociative regression. Melody will serve as her proxy until further notice." The psychiatrist nodded. "I'll write the note," Melody added. "We're doing this for her own good." I pressed pause. My hands were shaking. I wasn't watching a scheme. I was watching a heist. Of my life. They're building legal groundwork to have you declared unfit, Vi said. And they're almost there. My throat was tight. How do we fight that? Vi smirked. We burn it from the inside. She reached into her bag and pulled out a pen-sized recorder. You remember that hallway vent outside the study, she said. If you can get this in there before their next family meeting, we might catch enough to build your counterstrike. I hesitated. I don't want revenge, I whispered. I want out, but on my own terms, Vi smiled. Then let's make sure you walk away with truth in your hands. 2 days later, Melody returned from Lisbon alone. She found me in the kitchen dicing carrots. I brought you a scarf from the summit, she said, placing a silk bundle on the counter. I know you couldn't come. Shame, really. They had a whole session on women reclaiming their narrative. I smiled faintly. I'm working on that. She didn't notice the edge in my tone. That night they held a family meeting in the study. Julian, Brett, Melody, and their legal advisor. I slipped the recorder into the vent just before it started. Vi boosted the audio the next morning. Julian. She's softened again. I think we can file by the end of next week. Melody. Are we ready to move her out? The suite in Santa Fe is still on hold. Brett. We have the psychiatric evaluation ready. All we need is one more incident. I'll arrange it. Then a pause, a sound of clinking glasses. Julian again. To the new Hawthorne legacy. Free of ghosts. That was the moment I stopped being afraid. Because ghosts don't fight back. People do. I met with Walter the next morning. He was already dressed, sipping coffee like the house wasn't falling apart one truth at a time. I need everything I told him. He raised an eyebrow. Everything. Every document, every file, every legal clause that gives them power. I want to know the rules of the game before I rewrite them. He smiled like he'd been waiting for that. 2 hours later, we were in his private study. He opened a hidden drawer in the wall and pulled out a locked briefcase. Inside, original estate amendments, family trust documents, and at the very bottom, a notarized will change dated just 3 months prior. He handed it to me. In the event of proven manipulation, all inheriting rights revert to a named party of my choosing. I flipped the page. My name. Elaine Cho. He watched me read it, then said, They thought you were the help. But I've watched you hold this family together while they built illusions. I stared at the paper. They'll come after me harder now. Good, he said. That means they're scared. I folded the documents carefully, my hands steadier than they'd been in months. I'm not walking out quietly anymore, I said. They took enough. Walter poured another cup of coffee. Then it's time they learned who you really are. The hardest part wasn't finding the truth. It was deciding how to tell it. Vi and I spent the next 2 days preparing. We edited the audio clips, labeled the files, and cataloged every document that proved what they had done. How they stole my identity, my rights, my family's legacy. Walter stayed quiet through most of it, only offering commentary when I asked. But every so often he'd say something like, "Truth always sounds louder when people are used to silence." By the 3rd day, the plan was clear. Melody was hosting a launch event for her new book and wellness brand, Still She Rises, at a local cultural center. It was supposed to be a celebration of resilience, of female rebirth after hardship. She'd been teasing it for weeks on her social media, elegant gowns, champagne flutes, hashtags about healing. It would be live streamed. Over 50,000 followers watching. The perfect stage. I arrived early. Jasper, Walter's longtime driver, picked me up dressed in a tailored gray suit and handed me a microphone pack like we were on a covert mission. You sure about this? He asked as I adjusted the mic under my dress collar. I nodded. I'm not here to destroy them, just to let them destroy themselves with their own words. The event hall was already packed when I stepped inside. Sponsors milled about clinking glasses. Influencers posed by branded step-and-repeat banners. Melody was on stage bathed in soft light wearing a blush-colored dress and holding her latest book like a sacred artifact. I was broken once she said, her voice trembling perfectly for the cameras. But every woman has the right to reframe her past, to step into power. The audience applauded politely. Someone near the front wiped a tear. That's when I walked onto the stage. I didn't wait for permission. The room went still. Gasps followed. Elaine Melody's voice cracked, her smile faltering. I took the extra mic from the podium and faced the crowd. "You know me as Elaine," I said calmly. "You may not know what I've endured, but you're about to learn what they hoped you never would." I pressed play on the audio file. First came Melody's voice. "She's already halfway invisible. Let's lean in." Then Julian's. "She's perfect, quiet, loyal, no family left to object." The room rippled. The clip continued. Melody laughing about drugging me, Julian celebrating the financial transfers, Brett strategizing legal manipulation. Gasps turned to murmurs. Phones rose into the air. Live streams activated. I saw a PR rep from one of the sponsors slowly step back toward the exit. Melody tried to reach for the mic. This is doctored." "You're unstable, Elaine. I held up a stack of documents. Bank statements, transfer logs, legal signatures digitally forged, psychiatric claims orchestrated for control." I turned to the crowd again. "You've been sold a brand built on my silence." A pause. Then Walter walked in, cane in hand, but steady. He looked like a myth, regal, tired, but undeniably alive. The press cameras swung toward him. He joined me on stage, took the second mic, and said only this: "I faked my illness to see who would fight for the truth. I found her." That was it. He didn't need to say more. Because by then the evidence was speaking louder than any speech ever could. Melody stumbled back from the stage. Julian appeared at the back of the room, eyes wide, face pale. Brett was nowhere to be found. I left the stage with Walter beside me. Outside, the evening air was cool, the sky streaked with lavender and steel gray. Jasper pulled the car around, and as I slid into the passenger seat, he glanced at me through the mirror. "You good?" I exhaled. "No, but I'm done pretending I'm not." We drove past the cultural center, past the rows of parked cars, past the posters of Melody's book that had already been torn halfway off the display boards. By morning, the livestream had gone viral. The hashtag #ReclaimElaine was trending. Sponsors pulled out. Melody's publisher announced a pause in future releases. Brett's firm launched an internal ethics investigation. Julian, well, he tried to claim ignorance, but there were too many receipts, too much truth to outrun. Walter's legal team began the process of activating the estate clause, revoking all rights from any heir found guilty of manipulation or fraud, which now meant all of them. And me, I didn't gloat. I didn't host interviews or write op-eds. I went back to the place they first tried to erase me, the estate. The walls were the same, the art was the same, but the weight of the house had shifted. Walter handed me the new deed personally. "This is yours now," he said. "Every room they tried to silence you in, you now own." I walked through the halls slowly. The library, the sunroom, the kitchen where I used to bake in silence while Melody took credit. Then I reached the study, the place they held their secret meetings. I sat at the desk alone. I opened a fresh journal and wrote 5 words. They almost made me disappear. Then underneath that, but I was watching too. The first thing I did was change the locks. Not out of fear, out of finality. It wasn't revenge. It was release. The estate felt different after that. Still grand, still hushed in that old New England way, but no longer oppressive. It no longer pressed against me like a weight I couldn't name. It simply stood, like a monument to everything that had been uncovered, and everything that was finally mine. Walter left the estate 2 weeks later, quietly. No announcements, just a handwritten note on the kitchen table. Let it become something new. And remember, when you were silent, they feared you less. He moved into a small coastal town in Rhode Island, sent me postcards every few months with short quotes scribbled in black ink. My favorite one just said, "They don't see it coming when you've learned how to listen." As for the others, the world caught up to them faster than I expected. Brett was disbarred 6 months after the recordings surfaced. His role in falsifying guardianship documents couldn't be buried under even the most expensive legal team. He quietly left town. Rumor has it he moved to Belize. Julian filed for bankruptcy before the year ended. Every business deal he'd leveraged against my assets crumbled once his name became synonymous with manipulation and financial abuse. We never spoke again. The divorce was swift, uncontested. Walter had ensured my name was protected, and with Vi's help, I recovered enough evidence to sever the last of the financial ties they'd tried to knot me into. And Melody. She tried to pivot, claimed she was the victim of an internal smear campaign, that the recordings were edited out of context. But truth doesn't need editing, it simply persists. Her brand collapsed within weeks, sponsors pulled out, followers turned, her podcast lost all advertising. She disappeared for a while, then resurfaced in Bali offering retreats for emotional detox. I didn't follow her journey. I didn't care, because something strange had begun happening in the wake of everything. Women started writing to me. Emails, letters, messages on old blog posts I'd forgotten were still live. Some were from strangers. Others from women I had once called friends, now distant and scattered across years and cities. They said things like I thought I was the only one they left out of the photo. I kept the receipts too. I just didn't know what to do with them. Thank you for being the one who didn't stay quiet. At first, I didn't know what to do with their words. I didn't feel brave. I didn't feel wise. I just felt recovering. But eventually, I began to write back. One at a time. I answered every letter, every message, every story. Because when someone tells you they've been erased, the most powerful thing you can do is say, I see you. And I did. I saw all of them. I started a small foundation, quietly. No big PR campaign. Just a website with one mission: support for the overlooked, resources for the legally unprotected, community for the ones who stayed too long. I called it the quiet room. Because sometimes healing starts in the hush after the storm, when no one is clapping and no one is watching, and you are finally alone with your truth. The estate became its headquarters. I kept one wing for myself. The rest I opened to women in transition, those fighting for legal autonomy, or simply needing a place to stand still long enough to find their breath again. We hosted workshops, legal aid, memoir writing circles. Some days we just sat together and said nothing. Because silence when chosen is not weakness, it's power. Walter visited once unannounced. He brought a small wooden box, old and sanded smooth. Inside was a photograph of me from years ago taken during one of those forgotten family holidays. I was holding a plate of cookies, smiling faintly, standing behind Melody in her red dress. There was something strange about the image. I hadn't remembered the moment. I wasn't even sure I knew who had taken it. But on the back in his handwriting, Walter had written, "She kept the house warm while they played Queen." I didn't cry. Not then. But when he left and I sat in the study alone staring at that picture, I felt something inside me unclench. It wasn't about being right or winning. It was about finally being real. Some months later, a small legal notice appeared in the town paper Melody Hawthorne versus Elaine Cho, civil motion denied. It lasted 3 hours in court. Her lawyer presented outdated claims. We countered with recordings, logs, the trust amendment. The judge barely blinked before ruling. Outside the courthouse, Melody brushed past me without a word. She didn't meet my eyes. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I simply walked past her head high, holding the ruling in my hands like a compass. By the end of that year, I published my first book. Not under a pen name, not through their imprint, just mine. It was called The Quiet Inheritance. Not a tell-all, a tell-true. I wrote about how silence can be sacred, but also stolen. How women are told to serve, to soothe, to stay. How families rewrite history not with lies, but omissions. And how one woman learned that the most dangerous thing she could do was remember everything. The book found readers, not millions, just enough. Enough women who told me, "You said what I didn't have words for." That was all I ever needed. I don't live in the estate full-time anymore. I keep a small place on the coast, a cottage with white shutters and a garden I'm learning to tend. Walter passed away quietly last spring. He left a single note in his will addressed only to me. It read, "You were the only one who didn't need to inherit power because you already had it." I keep it in my desk drawer. On difficult days, I open it. I read it. Then I go back to my work. Because there's always another letter to answer, another woman trying to be heard. And now I know how to listen. They called me the maid in their castle, but it turns out I was the only one who ever kept it standing.